I stand before you tonight in my red star chiffon evening gown.
What people love is the smack of firm government. And whether it was real or just an impression, people felt that Margaret Thatcher gave them the smack of firm government.
Nevertheless, never mind, it's wet outside. I expect they wanted to come in. You can't blame them, it's always better where the Tories are.
She was the Prime Minister who really did root out socialism from the system.
Let Labour's Orwellian nightmare of the left be the spur for us to dedicate with a new urgency our every ounce of energy and moral strength to rebuild the fortunes of this free nation.
Well, I suppose in a way one could say that Margaret Thatcher and Winston Churchill were the two luckiest prime ministers in the 20th century, because they both had to face a huge problem. And the country in each case had no doubt that it was in the last chance saloon. And Margaret was able, and Winston was able, to take tough decisions.
My face softly made up and my fair hair gently waved.
Prime Minister, leader, oh, you might hate her, but you really felt she knew what she was doing.
The Iron Lady of the Western world.
From the beginning, Margaret Thatcher was someone who stood out from the crowd. At first, she stood out from the crowd in a rather annoying way. There was something rather strident about her. There was something about her voice that actually grated on you a little. There was something about her that seemed just a little bit too keen. But there was always something special about her.
She has been interested in politics really all her life. See, her father was interested in local politics, always on the council, Mayor of Grantham. It was part of her, the air she breathed. I think she was determined to be a Member of Parliament from a very early day.
It was a rather dull family in a rather dull Lincolnshire town, with a rather dull father who really made it through the ranks of local politics.
Margaret Thatcher had heroes both personal and professional, if I can put it that way. A personal hero was undoubtedly her father. He was the name of Roberts. He was a local politician. He wasn't a very wealthy man. He ran a shop. But he was a very, what's the right way to put it, a very upright man, a man of very decided views about what was right and what was wrong.
They were very old-fashioned values, but ones which, in her book, stood the test of time. I remember once she said to me when we were having a chat and talking about those values, she said, "Michael, a man has no greater duty than to put a roof over his family's head and to put food upon the table." That was because she couldn't stand people who basically relied on benefits. But notice that she always, when she talked about these, said it was a man who did it. It was an old-fashioned view of life, but one which she thought held the key to how political happiness could come about, political success, individual happiness could come about. Her father taught her how to lead. She watched how he was the one who was prepared to go for it. And it's interesting that she hardly ever referred to her mother. It was always her father. Her father was the idol. Her father was the one, obviously, who encouraged her to get to the local grammar school, to work hard. And forever afterwards, she acknowledged the fact that she learnt her basic values at her father's knee.
The older end of the school, during the war, we did have visiting speakers frequently. They'd come and talk on all sorts of subjects, from dress, from history of costume, to birds and all sorts of things. But if it was anything to do with current events, then Margaret did show an interest, and she could always be guaranteed to get up at the end and ask penetrating questions, you know. We, her classmates, would sort of exchange looks and, oh, she's at it again, you know.
I don't think the feeling that she was an extraordinary person came until much, much later. There's the famous story about her chemistry tutor at Oxford, who was asked later about what he had thought of her time at Oxford, and he said she was a perfectly good second-class chemist.
I remember her because she was, I think I'm right in saying, the first woman ever to become president of the Oxford University Conservative Association. I also belong to it, and I can see her in my mind's eye taking the chair at one of the meetings. And very impressive she was too. Her, I think, strength of character and clarity of thought came out very early on, and everyone was impressed by the way she ran its affairs.
She left with much more confidence and a greater determination to get into Parliament.
She finally felt that she wanted to get into politics. She spent some time working as a food scientist, and then she had a bit of a hankering to go for law. In the end, she decided that politics was what she wanted to try and get into. And then she worked her way steadily up the progression.
What's so wonderful about Margaret Thatcher is that she was a conviction politician. And so right from the beginning, from the 1950s, she conceived this idea, I'm going to go into politics to make a difference. And she bustled into the room.
Almost unthinkable in Margaret Thatcher's day that you would become a woman MP unless you'd reached the age of 45 or 50, and you had a pretty forward-looking local Conservative association. Because there was still that built-in assumption among the older people who formed the electorates in these local Conservative associations that the right and proper thing was for their MP to be a man.
Now, some of the older Conservative politicians found this a bit alarming. Some, thinking that she was rather attractive, thought they could handle her and manage her, you know, attractive young filly. Others thought, oh dear, she's a little bit loud, isn't she? But right from the beginning, Margaret Thatcher was a woman with convictions and with drive, and she was determined to find a seat.
Mrs. Thatcher, it's always supposed to be a tremendous ordeal, maiden speech. Was it for you?
Oh, very much so. I've done a good deal of other speaking, but speaking in the House of Commons is quite different. It's a unique experience.
Do you think it's more difficult because you are a woman?
No, I didn't notice that. It really is because of the quality of one's audience and the fact that most of them have had more experience at doing precisely what you are doing.
There's been universal praise for your performance yesterday. Talk of the front bench. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think we'll just try to be a very good backbencher first. Certainly until these two are a little older, I couldn't take on any more political responsibilities. These responsibilities are quite enough.
If you had Margaret Thatcher sitting now where I am and were asking her about these questions of bringing up the children and that kind of, she would say something like, well, I just got on with it. I just got on with it. Almost she would say to you, I don't really understand why you're asking the question. Plenty of women get on with it, and I did. That was her attitude.
Carol and Mark, if you say have they missed out on anything, because I lived at home, I was always there, could be there when wanted, and saw a lot of them.
It wouldn't in private have been exactly what had happened. It was obviously extremely difficult, particularly, of course, they were twins. But part of the persona that she built was that don't fuss about these things. You know, you've got two children, you just get on with it.
Have you been able to combine your political life with looking after a family, running a home?
Well, I mainly do the catering here. I like cooking and I do the shopping and always a big batch of cooking at the weekend. And of course there are the parliamentary recesses which coincide with the school holidays, so I can see quite a good bit of the children and take them out. And at half-term they come up to the House of Commons and have lunch with me.
It is difficult for a female politician, and because, I mean, even today, Theresa May says things like people always talk about her shoes, but Margaret Thatcher always had to have her hair done. She always had to decide what she was going to wear. People would always look at what she was wearing as much as listening to what she was saying. There was always that extra problem, which frankly doesn't happen with a male politician at all. But it does happen with a female politician.
But what's it going to mean in your home life? Obviously, you're going to have to make some adjustments.
I think it's going to mean even more organisation and method. I'm a great believer in those two things. But in any case, I could never do it were it not for the fact that my home is within 35 minutes of Westminster.
Yes.
I have an excellent nanny housekeeper, which helps immensely. But I see the children every morning, and they're at school all day, and of course I make a point of seeing and being with them at weekends.
People had spotted early that she had real talent. Once she got elected as an MP, she was made a junior minister within 2 years, and to become a junior minister 2 years after you've been elected, particularly if you're a woman, said that the whips particularly had obviously spotted that here was someone that was different and ought to be encouraged.
In the debate on taxation, councils varied, but taxes down was the common theme. And there was repeated applause for Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, a front-bench spokesman on economic matters. Without incentives, she said, the wealth is never created to distribute.
If you run all the budgets in a race called the high taxation stakes, I am glad to say that Conservative budgets don't come in any of the first 4 places. The topmost prize for increased taxation would go to Hugh Gateskill in 1951. The second prize for increased taxation would go to Callaghan in 1966. The third prize to Callaghan in 1965. The fourth prize to Callaghan in 1964. This chap Callaghan must go.
Having been made a minister so soon, then the Conservatives went into opposition, and then she worked her way through various shadow portfolios, and all the time she was building that expertise.
And she was very lucky, I think, in finding also a husband, a man who'd been married before, a slightly older man, who was in a position to let his young wife have her head. And because she was blessed by having twins, she managed in an organized way to get having the children out of the way. She had her 2 children, she had her well-off husband who was indulgent of her, and she had her personal ambition. And she thrust forward.
I met Dennis the night I was adopted as Conservative candidate to fight the Dartford election, the 1950 election, and he was at the meeting with mutual friends of ours. It was very difficult in those days to get a lift home, and there was a reception after the meeting, and that would have meant I'd have missed the train, so he gave me a lift back. He's absolutely marvellous, and his support is wonderful and critical. It really is. I think it's critical for a person in this very grueling job to have total support of the kind which I received from one's family. And he's absolutely marvellous, both when we're doing the job of Prime Minister and during the campaign. He's been terrific.